Liz Collins with us. Many of you will know Liz Collins from her years.
Collin, no S.
Collin.
I'm sorry.
Strike one.
Obviously, I don't know her.
I've been called worse.
Liz Collin, who for years was on Channel 4. From when to when, by the way?
I was there beginning in 2008 and was there for 14 years. So,
And why are you not there now?
All right, we're getting right into it.
Hey, welcome to the show.
Yeah.
Were you fired?
I was demoted after the George Floyd incident. My husband was at the time the Minneapolis Police Union president.
Bob Kroll.
Yep, and he's since retired, but I was never given my position back. I was a longtime anchor at WCCO. Was basically promoted to the position 6 months after I started there back in 2008. And it was clear that my voice and especially the person I was married to, I was definitely, it was clear that I needed to go elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
What does that tell you about the media in general in the Twin Cities?
Well, partly another reason I left, Joe, is I was so tired of pushing the propaganda at the station where I worked. We were especially left, and we were always left. I knew that. I was never political because I'm a journalist, right? But I was always more conservative in my beliefs and such. But it really got to a point with COVID, with this narrative of police are the bad guys. I could go on and on just about different storylines, but we didn't care about the other side anymore. It was sort of this lies by omission. I feel like we were privy to all of this information. People are giving us tips and et cetera, but we were crafting in a way that I don't think we were actually informing the public. And I needed to go elsewhere because all of these people, I think, in their stories were being ignored. So that's what I'm hoping to do now at Alpha News. And we've been doing for about 9 months or so. They've been around for a little while, but I like the fact they're uncensored and unafraid. That's our slogan.
You're here because you have a new book, and it's called They're Lying: The Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd. Who's they? Who's lying?
Well, the media, the left.
Yeah.
right there. But the story is a little bit about my own kind of front row seat to this movement we saw in Minneapolis and then went across the country as well. But I was so troubled as a wife and a mom, but more so as a journalist. Again, all of this information that we're not asking questions from the very beginning. The body cameras, they're not released in this incident, and there's a reason for that. The background of George Floyd. It's really laid out in this book about all the things that were not talked about from the very beginning that I believe an entire generation, Joe, of Minnesotans will pay for as a result of this. Minneapolis, we've seen what's happened, and again, the media was basically grandstanding and, in my opinion, cheerleading this from the very beginning. And they should have been asking questions.
You mentioned off the air something interesting. You wish this book had come out before the election.
It did. I think it just needed to come out a little bit sooner. But in Minnesota, the research that I've done, I really go after the players that I feel got a free pass from the very beginning with what played out. We had the perfect people in the perfect positions for this to happen. Keith Ellison is named quite a bit in the book and his background and such. But that's a topic that even, again, we saw the mainstream media barely even touch him during the election season. Mm-hmm. And his past is quite troubling. He has 5 police officers in prison now, and this was his plan all along. We'll see how this all plays out with him being reelected, which is astonishing to me. But I feel that, again, the mainstream media they weren't putting the pieces together because it felt like, to me, there was more activism going on than actual journalism.
What is it that you contend in the book that George Floyd was not purposely killed by the police?
Well, I think it's that's fair to say, but more than that, we're hearing from Derek Chauvin for the very first time, from Thomas Lane, who's serving his sentence now in Colorado. But it's really laid out in several different sections. And, the question is always asked, well, did he die of a drug overdose? And I think the answer is I don't think we know because no one has been honest about it. As noted by the medical examiner, the county attorneys, just hours after the autopsy, there were multiple factors. And we saw that words kind of disappear from documents, and I have a lot of documentation in the book. And we really go into also the court case, right? So Derek Chauvin is found guilty of these 3 charges. So of course he's guilty, right? But there is a lot playing out in court that people never had any idea. And the response I've gotten to the book has really just been amazing. It's been an Amazon bestseller for about 3 weeks now since we released it. But it really goes to show that I think so many people knew there was more going on and they weren't being told from the very beginning. And there was a reason they weren't.
What about what I saw?
Yeah, and I think that's the question, right? We didn't even know that three other officers were involved because there was a reason that the body cam videos were held for so long. If you remember, it was about 2.5 months before the body cameras were even released, and at that point they were leaked to a media outlet. You had to sign up to see the body cam footage. But again, it really boiled down to, this is a black and white story. If you say anything else, you're racist. This is a white officer and this is a black man. And that was the narrative and how it was crafted from the very beginning. Nobody talks about the black officer, J. Alexander King, who was with George Floyd 15 minutes for much longer than Derek Chauvin ever was. This is a black officer. Again, this was about race from the very beginning, and there was so much more to the story.
But what about what I saw, the knee on the neck?
Well, and it came out.
And I'm a Minnesotan watching this, and I'm saying, get off his neck.
Right.
Just get off.
Right. And we talk about all of this in the book. It's another thing that happens in the course of this, and what Derek talks about in the book, is there is this MRT training, maximum restraint technique, where the knee is more on the shoulder blade, which also the chief Madera Arredondo at the time admits to that. Once he sees a different angle of the video, he says on the stand, it does appear that his knee isn't there. And this is, again, the damage has been done. It's a year later. But also this MRT manual quickly disappears offline. It goes offline from the training manual. And isn't put back online for weeks. And again, we hear from the police department from the very beginning, this isn't part of training. We've never seen this maneuver before, et cetera, et cetera. Well, again, just another one of the many, many lies that were told from the beginning.
Now, you, at the time, were still with Channel 4.
Right.
You're still leading newscasts.
No, I was basically put on COVID patrol for about 2 years, and that was the only subject I was allowed to report on. But only one side of COVID, Joe. There was many other stories we could have tackled, but we were just chasing around the governor and pushing get your shot, even when people started to say, "Hey, I'm experiencing side effects" or whatnot. So again, that's another story. There was a lot more too that we weren't interested in telling.
What role did COVID play in the coverage of George Floyd?
Another, I think another good question, and this is, I didn't know Chris even he was allowed to ask questions.
No, you know what, Liz, he shouldn't.
Okay.
Wow.
Have you seen John Haidt behind you, by the way?
Yeah, we said hi,
Okay.
Joe.
Yeah,
Okay.
John and I go way back.
I do have a question too.
Oh, okay.
When we're done, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, again, an important question too, because at this time everybody's cooped up, and I think a lot of the riots can be blamed on a lot of that as well.
Me
and I
too.
will say too that we talked to a lot of officers in this book that have never shared their story before, which I think is really eye-opening about how they're stuck in the precinct, how the plan by their administration, by city leaders, is for one of them to be harmed as sort of a reparation in a way. I think their stories are absolutely heartbreaking, and what's led to this mass exodus from Minneapolis police ever since.
John, would you go ahead?
Yeah, Liz, a question I have about, I don't disagree with a lot about what you said there about the whole thing with making Chauvin kind of the sacrificial lamb. And I haven't read the book. I'm sorry. I wish I had. But
you guys, didn't I send you guys the book?
No, you did not.
I think I sent a PDF.
It's probably my fault.
Yeah, Chris has 4 copies sitting. Right.
But
anyway,
but John, just a minute. Let me interrupt for a moment.
Mhm.
I'm breaking a law. I told you this off the air. You're the first author I've interviewed where I haven't read the book.
Yeah.
But I wanted you as a guest because I think it's so timely given the election, which I want to bring us back to talk about. John, go ahead.
And I think the whole racial end of it, you're correct too. It turned into a racial thing when it shouldn't have. But do you think, and I know the testimony from the original trials, et cetera, would seem to indicate that the folks, the pathologists, et cetera, thought the death certainly was caused by his actions. In the book, do you address that? Do you think that's true? Do you think it's not true?
Yeah, I think
it's kind of, go
Yep,
ahead.
I do talk about that, and I think what's interesting when I'm talking about what's happening behind the scenes with the prosecution, they created so many conflicts of interest that Eric Nelson talks to me about this, who's Chauvin's attorney, that they couldn't even get a medical examiner to. Ellison brings on more than a dozen attorneys from the very beginning, and they're making phone calls to different medical examiners across the country. So they really had a hard time even getting someone to testify, on their behalf for the defense, because they created these conflicts of interest from the beginning.
Okay.
But we do go into that, and really, it's we let people see for themselves. A lot of people don't know that there were 3 autopsies done on George Floyd. One by the Hennepin County Medical Examiner, obviously, and then one basically paid for by the family. They were released just within hours of each other, and the media ran with what they called the independent autopsy, which was again paid for by the family, and the bottom line was he died from what he saw in the video, and that's actually in the document. And then we also go into the federal government, their role in this case, because I think a lot of people didn't know that as well. The FBI was involved from the very beginning too, and sat in on meetings with the medical examiner as we saw him kind of backtrack and change his story in the days that followed.
Would it have made a difference to say that George Floyd died from a drug overdose? Would that erase the 9 minutes that everyone can't unsee?
I think the question is, many things could have changed. The riots didn't have to happen. Instead of taking a step back, actually explaining this training, that this was a part of training, we saw a mayor make this about race immediately, right? He's apologizing to Black America from the very, very beginning. And there was also a chief that echoed that exact same message. The top law enforcement officer, the Attorney General's office, same thing. That's the narrative. And as this is shown in even history, that doesn't work. That actually makes people more angry, and I think fueled the fire, if you will. Here, I think there was and I have to go back to just the timing, not only COVID, but we have a presidential election coming up in months, right? And we are going to oust President Trump no matter what. And this is the perfect scenario in a way for politicians to pounce on. So the autopsy is done on George Floyd within 12 hours. Why do we hear about the autopsy and what the results are a week later, after Minneapolis is allowed to burn? These are the questions I thought journalists should be asking from the beginning.
How did this change urban Minneapolis?
An excellent question. I think that it will be a decade before things come back. I mean, the people I worked and I lived in that city for 12 years myself, and I'm out in the burbs now. But I know a lot of people. I don't know if it's similar for you guys, that people just refuse to go there, which I think is very sad. And I'm also struck too how the media, they don't really go back to this area. This isn't. I was part of Candace Owens and her Daily Wire team did a documentary on Black Lives Matter, and walked the streets of 38th in Chicago and went into that a little bit. But I thought this was a story. Again, it's conservative media, so I know it's going to be ignored completely by the mainstream media. But this is an organization, Black Lives Matter, who got $80 million in donations, basically on the back of George Floyd.
Right.
And
much of it spent fraudulently.
Right. And that's the point of the documentary. And Bob and I talked a little bit about that because, in a way, Black Lives Matter, they came after us too. They were in front of our house 2 different times. Right. One where they're bashing piñata effigies of us in the driveway. And it's just amazing how that has just, the media doesn't go back and actually look at the cost here.
You want to give Liz a bit of a smile?
Sure.
Play the John Thompson.
Oh, yeah,
Oh
that's
gosh.
This is a roll call vote.
It was sent to us by a mole.
When this
A roll call vote.
when
Okay.
this lunatic Thompson was still a legislator,
Go.
and it's pretty funny. Listen closely.
Morrison.
Morrison, I.
Morrison, I. Mortensen.
Mortensen, no.
Mortensen, no. Sandell.
Adele, I.
Sandell, I. Thompson.
You're the
Thompson, I.
Thompson, I. Mecklin.
Wow.
Somebody
Wow.
planted a siren. I thought you'd get a kick out of it.
But when we first were sent the audio, Liz, what you'll love is we all thought, because everyone, again, was all working remotely
Yeah.
and voting remotely, and we
Wow.
thought, this idiot is getting stopped while he's trying to make a vote.
That's-
But turns out it was planted by a fellow legislator,
That's
which,
quite funny.
which almost made it better.
That's yeah, right.
Are you the only one in town who could
That's
have
funny.
written this or would have written this?
Oh, I think so. I had the joy of being canceled already. So
I mean, by CBS affiliate.
yeah. But I again, I think my just experience is, and I never reported on on George Floyd at all while I was there at WCCO. Again, I was hard at work with COVID. But there was a reason for that with Bob's position. But then he retired, and again, a year passes, and it was clear that I wasn't wanted there. But we've seen this again in newsrooms across the country. I think especially here in Minneapolis as well, that the conservative viewpoint really isn't wanted anymore. You kind of have to go along with the program. You got to just get in line and go woke.
How do you
If you
compare?
will.
How do you compare that? Because I'm sure you have friends all over the country. How do you compare this market in that regard to other large markets across the
It's
country?
very, very similar story.
We call it the closer you get to the country's tallest buildings, you are fated, F-A-T, to be led by the left. And the post George Floyd world has increased that, I think.
Oh, 100%.
In Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, here, New York, Chicago. And who is your audience for this book? Who do you want to read this?
Anybody who cares about the truth.
Glenn Fry, I said. Jacob Fry is not going to read it.
I'm actually going to take one to his office soon. So, I'll drop it off.
And in Minneapolis right now, if you had to put your reporter's hat back on and you were at CCO, can you even figure out who's in charge of law enforcement in Minneapolis?
Well, the thing is, it's always been the mayor. So one would argue, why would he think that this is a good leadership strategy to throw his entire department under the bus? I think we've seen how that has played out. We're talking about the woke culture. I'll just say, even after George Floyd at CCO, there's a mandate put in place, Joe, about who we can interview. 50% of the people we interview have to be in a protected class or of color.
Mm-hmm.
This is the
Really?
definition of racism, as far as
That's-
I'm
yeah,
far as I'm
that's
concerned. And
really-
we are news people. And again, this is the propaganda that, and I'm kind of alone going, what the hell are we doing? But again, I could give many examples as to how this all.
Well, it's safe to assume that they'll never recognize this book.
Yeah, no mainstream media has reached out, Joe.
Right.
So yeah,
Right. The Star Tribune will not
No.
review
Yeah.
this book.
No.
Well, and like you said, you've been canceled. You've been ostracized. So nobody's ever going to reach out, I'm guessing.
Liz, are you good on time?
yeah. I mean, if
I have 7 million questions I want to ask.
7 million.
7
Joe's not going to let you
million.
actually ask
Probably
any.
not.
So,
I might get one in.
7 million. I want to tell you that before we take a break, we're talking with Liz Collin, who has written "They're Lying: The Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd." I think I have a clarifying question about that.